The game that built America. The rise of the NFL. Imagine a world where the most powerful sports league in America almost never existed. Imagine Sunday afternoons without packed stadiums. No Super Bowl. No million-dollar commercials. No cultural phenomenon that brings families together across generations. There was a time when professional football was unstable, chaotic, nearly bankrupt, and struggling to survive in the shadow of baseball. This is not just the story of a league. This is the story of risk, of vision, of men who believed in something most people thought would fail. Welcome to the Past Notes. Tonight, we travel back over a century to uncover how the National Football League rose from near collapse to cultural dominance, and how one game changed everything. Because history is not just about what happened, it's about what almost didn't. America before the NFL. In the early 1900s, America was industrial, expanding, and restless. Baseball was king. College football was violent, raw, and wildly popular. But professional football? It was messy. Teams appeared and disappeared overnight. Players were underpaid. Rules were inconsistent. Crowds were small. And many believed the sport was too dangerous to survive. In fact, President Theodore Roosevelt once intervened to reform football because fatalities were threatening to shut it down entirely. Professional football was not glamorous. It was played on muddy fields, sometimes in empty lots, sometimes in borrowed stadiums, sometimes in front of just a few thousand people. And yet, a few men saw potential. They saw a future America gathering around something bigger than a game. On September 17, 1920, in a car dealership showroom in Canton, Ohio, a meeting took place that would quietly alter sports history. Representatives from several Midwestern teams gathered to form what they called the American Professional Football Association. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't celebrated. It wasn't even front-page news. But it was the beginning. Among those present was Jim Thorpe, Olympic champion, football star, and one of the most respected athletes in the country. He became the league's first president. In 1922, the league changed its name. It became the National Football League. At the time, no one could have predicted what those three letters would one day mean. The early years were unstable. Teams folded constantly. Owners struggled financially. Players often had second jobs. Schedules were inconsistent. But slowly, almost invisibly, something began to grow. The 1920s and 1930s were not kind to professional football. The Great Depression devastated the economy. Attendance dropped. Franchises collapsed. Baseball still dominated American culture. College football was considered superior. Professional football was seen as secondary, even inferior. And yet, innovation began. The forward pass evolved. Strategic formations developed. Rules became more organized. Ownership structures improved, but still, the NFL was fragile. By the 1940s, World War II drained rosters as players enlisted. Some teams temporarily merged just to survive. The NFL endured, barely, but endurance is not dominance. And survival does not guarantee success. That would require something else. Something dramatic, something unforgettable. In the 1950s, television was transforming American homes. Families gathered around black and white screens. Entertainment was changing. Advertising was changing. America itself was changing. The NFL saw an opportunity. If football could capture television audiences, It could compete nationally. But it needed a moment, a defining moment, a game powerful enough to grip the nation. And in 1958, that moment arrived. The NFL championship game, Baltimore Colts versus New York Giants. Yankee Stadium, December 28, 1958. No one yet knew they were about to witness what would later be called the greatest game ever played. The Giants represented New York power. The Colts brought precision and rising star quarterback Johnny Unitas. The game was nationally televised. Millions were watching. For the first time, professional football had a true national stage. The stakes were larger than a championship. This was about legitimacy, about identity, about proving that professional football deserved to matter, and what followed would alter the trajectory of American sports forever. December 28, 1958, Yankee Stadium, cold air, electric anticipation. More than 64,000 fans filled the stadium. Millions more watched from home. The Baltimore Colts versus the New York Giants. The Giants struck first. Their defense was aggressive, physical, punishing. They controlled tempo early. But the Colts had something different. They had Johnny Unitas. Unitas wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He wasn't theatrical. He was calm, and that calm would define everything. As the game progressed, tension escalated. Hard hits, missed opportunities, momentum swinging back and forth. The Colts began adjusting offensively. Short passes, controlled drives, discipline. Unitas led with precision. Each drive built pressure. Each completion built belief. The stadium atmosphere changed. This was no longer just a championship. It was drama. With minutes remaining, the score tightened. Every play mattered. Every second mattered. And America was watching. Late in the fourth quarter, the game stood tied. The Giants pushed forward. The Colts answered. Then something happened that had never happened before in an NFL championship. The game remained tied at the end of regulation. No one was prepared. There was no precedent. The NFL had to decide immediately, sudden death over time. The first in championship history. One score would end it. And millions were witnessing something entirely new. Overtime, the moment that changed everything. Overtime began. The pressure was enormous. One mistake could end it. One play could define careers. Johnny Unitas took the field. His composure under pressure became legendary. He marched the Colts down the field in what would become one of the most famous drives in sports history. Methodical, precise, unemotional. When Alan Ametsch crossed the goal line for the touchdown, the stadium erupted. The Colts had won, but more importantly, professional football had just proven it could deliver unmatched drama. The broadcast captured raw emotion, celebration, shock, intensity. Television audiences were hooked. That night, the NFL changed forever. The reaction was immediate. Newspapers called it the greatest game ever played. Television executives recognized the ratings power. Sponsors recognized the advertising potential. Families who had never cared about professional football began paying attention. The NFL had finally stepped out of baseball's shadow. It wasn't just surviving anymore, it was emerging. Attendance rose, revenue increased, expansion became realistic. The league gained legitimacy, and legitimacy changes everything. Throughout the 1960s, television contracts grew. Games became national events. Stars became household names. Football transformed from regional entertainment into a national ritual. Sunday became sacred. Communities gathered. Traditions formed. The NFL wasn't just a sport. It was becoming culture. But growth brought competition. In 1960, a rival league emerged, the American Football League. The AFL challenged the NFL directly. Higher salaries, flashier style, aggressive marketing. For a moment, history seemed ready to repeat itself. Two leagues, financial strain, possible collapse. But instead of destruction, there was negotiation. In 1966, the NFL and AFL agreed to merge, a decision that reshaped sports economics forever. And from that merger came something unprecedented, a championship game between leagues. The Super Bowl. The first Super Bowl in 1967 was not glamorous. Tickets didn't even sell out, but the idea was revolutionary. Two champions, one stage, national broadcast. What began modestly would grow into the most watched annual sporting event in America. The Super Bowl became more than a game. It became spectacle, advertising showcase, halftime cultural event, economic engine. And none of it would have happened without that game in 1958. The night football proved it belonged. As the league grew in power and revenue, America itself was changing. The 1960s were turbulent. Civil rights movements, social unrest, cultural transformation. Football could not exist outside of that reality. Although the NFL had reintegrated in 1946, true equality was far from achieved. Black athletes became central to the game's evolution. Their speed, intelligence, and physical dominance began redefining positions, but their journey was not easy. They faced discrimination, unequal treatment, limited leadership opportunities. And yet they persevered. Players like Jim Brown, Gale Sayers, and later Walter Payton became more than athletes. They became symbols. The NFL, like America, was being reshaped from within. The quarterback position evolved dramatically. In the early years, quarterbacks were managers. By the 1970s and 80s, they became icons. Roger Staubach, Terry Bradshaw, Joe Montana. They weren't just players. They were national figures. Television amplified their presence. Slow-motion replays, primetime games, dramatic storytelling. Football became cinematic, and quarterbacks became protagonists in a weekly national drama. By the 1980s and 1990s, the NFL was no longer just a league, it was an empire. Massive television contracts, merchandising, stadium expansions, corporate sponsorships. Franchises became billion-dollar enterprises. The salary cap system created competitive balance. The draft became a spectacle. Parity kept hope alive in every city. The NFL mastered something other leagues struggled with. It made every fan believe their team had a chance. Hope is powerful, and the NFL institutionalized hope. The Super Bowl evolved into a global phenomenon. It became the most watched television event in the United States, a cultural moment beyond sports, a platform for music, politics, advertising, and identity. Halftime shows became legendary. Commercials became part of the entertainment. The game itself became ritual. Even people who don't watch football watch the Super Bowl. That is cultural dominance, and it traces back to vision, survival, and one historic overtime game in 1958. But dominance brings scrutiny, concerns about player safety, concussions, long-term health consequences. Public debates intensified. The league faced lawsuits. Medical research exposed uncomfortable truths. Fans began asking difficult questions. Could the sport evolve without losing its identity? Rule changes were implemented. Safety protocols improved. Technology advanced. The NFL adapted because survival has always been part of its DNA. From bankruptcy fears in 1920 to television uncertainty in the 1950s, to medical controversy in the 2000s, the league has endured by evolving. Why does football endure? It is structured chaos. Violence within rules, strategy within aggression, individual brilliance within collective execution. It mirrors American identity, risk, ambition, resilience, redemption. Every Sunday, stories unfold. Underdogs rise, Favorites fall. Heroes are made in seconds. Football compresses drama into 60 minutes, and that is powerful. When a few men gathered in Canton, Ohio in 1920, they could not have imagined. Packed stadiums with 80,000 fans, global broadcasts, Super Bowl spectacles, billion-dollar franchises. They were simply trying to survive, trying to organize, trying to protect their teams, trying to give structure to a chaotic sport. But survival created legacy. And legacy created empire. The NFL was not built overnight. It was built through doubt, through near collapse, through rivalry, through risk. It was built by players who played for almost nothing, by owners who gambled everything, by fans who chose to believe. The game that almost failed became the game that defined a nation. And now, after this entire journey, let's go back to the beginning. To that packed stadium, to those lights, to that trophy being lifted in front of millions of people. Because today we know something that in 1920 was impossible to imagine, that a meeting inside a small car dealership in Canton, Ohio, didn't just create a league, it created a tradition, a culture, a ritual that repeats every Sunday. The NFL was not born an empire. It was born as a fragile idea, inside a chaotic sport, with no money, no massive crowds, and no guarantee it would survive. And yet, it did. It survived the Great Depression. It survived irrelevance. It survived competition. It survived criticism. It survived social change. Because football was never just a game. It was identity, it was community, it was hope, and maybe that is the real reason this sport is still here today. Not because of billion-dollar contracts, not because of the stadiums, not because of the spectacle, but because of the people. The players who risked everything, the owners who believed when no one else did. The fans who filled the stands when the league was still small. So now I want to ask you something. If you had been there in 1920, watching empty bleachers, teams going bankrupt, a sport with no clear future, would you have believed in this league? Or would you have walked away? What moment do you think changed the NFL forever? The 1958 championship game? The AFL merger? The birth of the Super Bowl? The modern era? Tell me in the comments. Because here at the Past Notes, we don't just remember history, we live it. And the next great story is already on its way.